The cold stone of the castle walls seeped into Anya's bones, a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the winter draft. From her small turret room, the sounds from the great hall below were a muffled torment. It wasn't the music or the laughter that made her press the heels of her palms into her temples. It was the lies. They slithered through the floorboards, a discordant hum beneath the surface of every polite conversation. Each false compliment her father, Lord Alistair, offered a guest was a sharp, metallic taste on her tongue. Each feigned smile from her mother, Genevieve, sent a painful tremor through her skull. This was the echo sickness, her family's name for the curse that made her a pariah in her own home. She was a ghost, confined to the shadows, her existence a shameful secret. Tonight, the sickness was particularly violent. Downstairs, her father was spinning a grand tale of a trade deal gone sour, blaming misfortune and treacherous partners. The lie was so immense, so layered, that it felt to Anya like a physical pressure building behind her eyes. She curled on her thin cot, a threadbare blanket pulled up to her chin, wishing for the silence of deafness. Her older sister, Isabel, the family's perfect jewel, had visited her an hour earlier. "Do try to be quiet, Anya," she'd said, her voice dripping with a pity more cruel than any insult. "Father has important guests. Don't ruin things with your fits." Later, when the last of the carriages had rolled away, the silence that fell upon the castle was heavy and absolute. Anya's door creaked open. It was her father, his face a mask of solemn duty that did nothing to hide the cold calculation in his eyes. He stood over her, a towering silhouette against the moonlight filtering through the arrow-slit window. "Anya," he began, his voice smooth as polished marble, "an arrangement has been made. A great honor has been bestowed upon you." The echo of the lie was a deafening roar in her mind, a cacophony so loud she feared her skull would crack. Honor. The word was a poison. "You are to be given to the Lycan King, Gideon," he continued, ignoring her flinch, "as a gesture of peace, a way to atone for a misunderstanding between our houses. You will serve a great purpose. Liar, deceiver, coward." The whispers were not her own. They were the raw, unfiltered truth of his words screaming at her. He wasn't giving her for peace. He was trading her life to save his own skin. She was not an offering. She was a sacrifice. The burden was finally being discarded. Yet a strange calm washed over her. The exhaustion was so deep, so complete, that there was no room left for protest. She simply nodded, her gaze fixed on a crack in the stone floor. What value did her life hold, anyway? Perhaps this was it. Her only purpose was to be thrown away. The departure was a quiet, gray affair at dawn. No one came to see her off. She gathered her only possessions, the worn blanket, and a small, smooth river stone she'd kept since she was a child, its solid weight the only honest thing she felt she'd ever known. Two of her father's guards, their faces grim and averted, escorted her to a crude cart waiting at the edge of the woods that marked the beginning of Lycan territory. As she climbed aboard, she didn't look back at the cold stone fortress that had been her prison. She was being sent to a monster, to a fate she could only assume was death. And in the hollowed-out space where her heart should have been, she felt nothing but the chilling finality of her own worthlessness. The cart jolted to a halt, its crude wooden wheels grinding against gravel. The guards prodded her forward, their touch impersonal, as if nudging livestock. Anya stumbled out and into a silence that was more profound than any she had ever known. Before her, carved into the face of a granite mountain, were two immense doors of iron and blackened wood. The air itself seemed different here, thicker, ancient, smelling of pine, damp earth, and something else, something wild and predatory. The doors groaned open, revealing not a dark cave, but a vast hall that seemed to swallow the light. Its scale was meant to intimidate, to make one feel small and mortal. It succeeded. The ceiling was lost in shadow, supported by pillars of raw, unpolished stone that looked like the petrified bones of giants. In the center of the hall, a circle of flat gray stones was laid into the floor, a stark and lonely stage, and all around it, lining the walls, stood figures of impossible size. Lichen warriors, clad in dark leather and steel, stood as motionless as the stone pillars, their silence a crushing weight. At the far end of the hall, upon a throne that looked hewn from the mountain itself, sat the King Alpha. Gideon. He was not a man. He was a geological event. Taller, broader, more immense than she could have imagined. A long, pale scar cut a path from his temple to his jaw, a stark line against a face that was otherwise a mask of stoic control. But his eyes, they were not human. They were the color of molten amber, and they were fixed on her, seeing not just her threadbare dress and trembling form, but the very marrow in her bones. Anya was led to the center of the judgment circle. The stones were cold beneath the thin soles of her shoes. This was it, the place where the sacrifice was to be made. She was a debt to be paid in blood. She waited for a pronouncement, a trial, a single word that would end her miserable existence. But none came. The silence stretched, pulled taut by the 100 pairs of predatory eyes watching her. The weight of their scrutiny, combined with the years of exhaustion and the hollow ache of her own worthlessness, was too much. The edges of her vision began to swim in black. The stone pillars wavered. Her father's final lying words about honor screamed in her mind, a final unbearable cacophony. Her knees buckled. Her bones felt like water. She closed her eyes, bracing for the final unforgiving impact of the stone floor, an impact that, she dimly understood, would be her only confession. The impact never came. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, the world shifted. A blur of motion, too fast for the human eye to truly track, erased the distance between the throne and the judgment circle. A wall of warmth and strength enveloped her. Two massive arms, corded with muscle, caught her before she fell, scooping her up as if she weighed nothing at all. The entire hall seemed to gasp, a collective, silent shock. The scent of winter air, of pine needles and cold iron, filled her senses. She was pressed against a chest so broad and solid, it felt like the mountain itself. A slow, steady heartbeat thumped against her ear, a rhythm of absolute power. She dared to open her eyes. She was looking up at the scarred face of the Lichen King. His amber eyes were no longer distant, they were right there, and in their depths she saw not fury, not contempt, but an intensity that stole her breath. He held her with a reverence that was utterly alien. Then he looked past her, his gaze sweeping over his stunned council and the guards who had delivered her. His voice, when it came, was not a shout, but a low thunder that vibrated through the very stone beneath their feet, a sound that was felt as much as it was heard. Your lord offered her as a sacrifice to pay for his crimes. Gideon's voice rumbled, each word an unshakable declaration. He made a mistake. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suffocating silence. He shifted his hold on her, pulling her closer, more securely against him. He did not give me a sacrifice. He gave me a gift. The word echoed in the vast hall, but for the first time in Anya's life, it was not the dissonant shriek of a lie. It was a pure, resonant truth, so powerful and so unexpected that it shattered something deep inside her. Gift. The concept was so foreign, so impossible, that her mind could not form a response. Without another word, Gideon turned. He strode from the judgment circle, carrying her as if she were the most precious treasure in his kingdom. The towering warriors parted before him, their heads bowed, their shock morphing into a dawning awe. He passed through the great hall, his long, effortless strides taking them away from the cold and the judgment. He moved through a series of quieter, torch-lit corridors, the air growing warmer with every step. He entered a set of chambers, and the change was immediate, a sensory shock that made her gasp. The cold, hard stone of the hall was gone, replaced by thick, soft fur rugs that muffled his footsteps. A massive fireplace roared against one wall, casting a warm, golden glow over everything and chasing the chill from her bones. The air smelled of burning cedar, old leather, and dried herbs. He didn't stop until he reached a large chaise lounge near the fire, where he laid her down with impossible gentleness. Two women appeared, their movements quiet and respectful. Healers. They approached, but not with the clinical detachment she was used to. Their eyes held a softness, a deference. One knelt, her hands hovering over Anya's worn-out shoes. "Your Majesty," one of the healers whispered, her gaze on Gideon. "She is freezing." Gideon simply nodded, his amber eyes never leaving Anya's face. He watched as they gently removed her damp shoes, as they wrapped her in a thick woolen blanket that felt softer than anything she had ever touched. They brought a basin of warm water and began to carefully clean the grime from her hands and face with a soft cloth. Every touch was careful. Every movement was kind. It was a language of care her body had never learned, and it was overwhelming. She had been sent here to die, a worthless offering to a monster. But the monster had caught her when she fell, and in his arms, in his home, for the first time in her life, she felt the faintest, most terrifying flicker of something she had only ever dreamed of: safety. The journey from the throne room to his private chambers was a silent passage through a different world. The cold, echoing stone gave way to corridors lined with dark, polished wood that drank the torchlight. The air grew warmer, scented with cedar and the faint, clean smell of beeswax. Gideon never faltered, his arms a cradle of unyielding strength. He carried her over the threshold of a heavy oak door and into a space that felt less like a room and more like a sanctuary. A fire roared in a stone hearth large enough for a man to stand in, its flames dancing across thick fur pelts strewn over the floor and furniture. Books were stacked on rough-hewn shelves, their leather spines worn with use. It was a space of quiet power, of warmth and substance. He laid her upon a chaise lounge draped in a wolf pelt so soft it felt like a cloud against her skin. The blanket they had wrapped her in was heavy and warm, a stark contrast to the threadbare scrap she'd called her own. The two healers followed them in, their steps hushed. One carried a basin of steaming water, the other a tray of salves and clean linen. They moved with a quiet efficiency, but their eyes kept flicking to Gideon, awaiting his silent command. He gave a short, sharp nod. The women knelt. One began to unlace Anya's worn boots, her touch so gentle Anya had to bite her lip to keep from flinching away. No one had ever touched her feet with such care. The other began to clean a small scrape on her cheek, a place where a god had shoved her against the cart. The sting of the warm water was nothing compared to the shock of the kindness. Food was brought, a thick, savory stew in a wooden bowl and a hunk of dark bread. It was simple, but the smell alone made her stomach ache with a hunger she hadn't realized was so profound. She ate slowly, mechanically, while the healers worked. They bathed her hands, her face, their movements a soothing ritual. They were washing away not just the grime of the road, but the filth of her old life, the residue of neglect. Gideon stood by the fire, a silent, monolithic guardian. He didn't speak, but his amber eyes never left her. He watched her eat every bite, watched every gentle ministration of his healers, his presence a suffocating, overwhelming blanket of protection. For the first time, Anya felt the dizzying sensation of being the most important thing in a room. Days later, she found herself seated not on a chaise, but on a carved wooden chair beside Gideon's throne. It was a smaller throne room, a council chamber where his most trusted advisors met. The air was thick with tension and the smell of old leather and smoke. An emissary from a neighboring clan, a man with shifty eyes and a smile that didn't reach them, was speaking. He offered treaties and alliances, his voice a smooth river of promises. And with every word, the old sickness clawed at Anya. It was a physical assault, a high-pitched whine behind her eyes, a sour taste on her tongue. The lies were intricate, layered, a tapestry of deceit. The pressure built until she could barely breathe. She saw Gideon's jaw tighten. He felt her distress through the bond that hummed between them, a low, constant current. He glanced at her, a silent question in his eyes. Trembling, she leaned closer, her lips brushing the shell of his ear. The words came out as a ragged whisper, a truth forced from her lungs. He's lying. Every word is a hidden dagger. He speaks of alliance, but he plans for war. Gideon didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for proof. Her word was enough. He straightened, his sheer size seeming to diminish the room. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the emissary's speech like an executioner's axe. You come to my hall and offer friendship with a poisoned tongue. The emissary paled, his false smile dissolving. Your Majesty, I don't— Silence, Gideon commanded. The word was not loud, but it slammed into the man with physical force. Gideon's amber eyes narrowed into predatory slits. My Luna has heard the truth in your heart, and it is black with treason. Under the crushing weight of Gideon's stare, the man crumbled. The confession spilled out of him. A planned ambush, a secret alliance with Gideon's enemies, a plot to shatter his kingdom from within. The council was in an uproar, their shock and fury a palpable wave. But as they dragged the traitor from the room, their eyes were on Anya. The suspicion she had seen in their faces was gone, replaced by a stunned, burgeoning awe. She hadn't just spoken, she had saved them. The whispers that had haunted her, the curse that had made her a pariah, had become their shield. Children began to leave her small carvings of animals on her doorstep. The elders would bow their heads as she passed, murmuring a new title, the Oracle of the Moon. She was no longer a broken thing. She was a sacred weapon. That night, when the moon was a perfect silver disk in the ink-black sky, Gideon led her from the keep. He took her hand, his large, calloused fingers engulfing hers, and guided her up a winding path to the highest peak overlooking the valley. They stood in a sacred clearing, surrounded by ancient, silent pines. The world fell away below them, a sea of silver-tipped trees. He turned to face her, the moonlight carving his scarred face into lines of stark beauty. He was no longer a king or a warrior. He was just a male, looking at his female, his soul bare in his eyes. For 100 years I have been king, he said, his voice a low rumble. I have known duty and battle and solitude. I thought that was all there was, a long gray road. He reached out, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was electric, a jolt of pure life. And then I saw you, standing on the judgment stones, so small and so fierce, drowning in the lies of lesser men. And my soul, which I thought was made of stone, recognized its other half. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. What you call a curse, your cacophony of echoes, he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. To me, it is the music of your soul, the truest soul I have ever found. Tears she didn't know she had left to cry welled in her eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of a profound, shattering release. He saw her, not the mad girl, not the burden, not the sacrifice. He saw her, and he found her perfect. They tried to silence you because they feared your truth, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. But in this kingdom, your truth is our law. Your soul is not a burden, Anya. It is our crown. In that moment, under the silent watch of the moon, she accepted it all. The bond, the love, the impossible reality of her new life. He was her home. The monster she was meant to fear had become her sanctuary. He lowered his head, his gaze asking a final silent question. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. His lips claimed hers, and it was not a kiss of gentle romance, but a raw, desperate claiming. It was a promise, an oath, a seal. Then he moved to the curve of her neck, and she tilted her head, offering herself to him completely. There was a brief, sharp sting as his teeth sank into her flesh, marking her, binding her to him for all eternity. It wasn't pain. It was a bolt of lightning, a fire that burned away every last vestige of the broken girl she had been. The mark pulsed with his life, his strength, his absolute devotion. The empty, hollowed-out space in her chest filled with a warmth so powerful it took her breath away. She was no longer an echo of other people's lies. She was his. And for the first time in her life, she was whole. The peace of the new moon was broken by the frantic beat of wings. A raven, black as polished obsidian, landed on the stone balustrade of their chamber, a sealed scroll tied to its leg. Anya felt no jolt of fear, no echo of the shivering girl she had been. Instead, a cold, clear stillness settled in her bones. Gideon was beside her in an instant, his hand resting on the small of her back, a silent offer of strength. He didn't read the scroll. He watched her face. "They are coming," she said, her voice even. The ink on the parchment was from her father's seal, but she didn't need to see it to know. The truth of it was a simple, clear note in the air. He wasn't coming for her. He was coming for the Luna of the Stonehand pack. He was coming for what she could give him. "What is your will, my heart?" Gideon's voice was a low rumble, a promise of annihilation held in check only by her desire. Anya looked out over the moon-drenched valley. Her valley. "I will see him," she said, turning to face her mate. Her eyes, once clouded with doubt, were as clear and sharp as winter stars. In the great hall, where it all began. The great throne hall was exactly as she remembered it, vast, intimidating, and carved from the bones of the mountain. But she was not the same. She sat not on the judgment stones, but upon a throne of dark wood and silver inlay to Gideon's right. She was dressed in deep forest green velvet, the silver clasp at her throat shaped into a snarling wolf's head. The mate's mark on her neck was a swirl of silvered scars, a declaration more powerful than any crown. When her family was led in, the contrast was almost pitiable. Lord Alistair, Lady Genevieve, and Isabel were dressed in their finest silks and velvets, but in the raw, primal power of the lichen hall, they looked like garish dolls. They looked small. Their eyes widened as they saw her, not with recognition, but with a covetous shock. They saw not their daughter, but an asset they had foolishly discarded. Lord Alistair stepped forward, his face arranged into a mask of fatherly concern. "Anya, my child," he began, his voice echoing falsely in the cavernous space. "We have been so worried, when we heard the rumors, that you were alive, that you were here." My heart was overjoyed. The old sickness was a phantom limb. She felt the dissonance of his lie, the ugly, discordant hum, but it no longer had the power to wound her. It was simply data. She let him continue, his words weaving a tapestry of deceit about trade routes, political alliances, and the strength our families could have together. He was begging, but dressing it in the language of command. When he finally paused, expecting her to fall into his arms or her old patterns of silent obedience, Anya leaned forward. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a whisper, but a clear, resonant tone that carried to every corner of the hall, cutting through his web of lies. "Father," she said, The word was flat, stripped of all emotion save for a cold finality. A hush fell over the assembled lichen court. The only whisper I don't hear today is the lie in my own voice. Alistair's face faltered. Anya, I don't understand. This place, this beast, he has twisted your mind. Anya rose from her throne, a slow, deliberate movement. She descended the 2 steps to the main floor and walked toward them, her movements fluid and confident. You threw me to the wolves, expecting me to be devoured, she said, her gaze locking onto his. But you forgot one thing, Father. Here, among the monsters, I finally found my pack. She let her eyes drift to her mother's stunned face and her sister's envious glare. And a queen never bows to a man who sells his own daughter. It was then that Gideon rose. He did not move quickly. He did not need to. His sheer presence was an avalanche. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop, the air crackling with his silent fury. He stood beside Anya, a mountain of protective rage, his amber eyes pinning Lord Alistair to the spot. You came here to barter. Gideon's voice was a low thunder, vibrating through the stone floor. You believe you have something I want. He paused, letting the terror build in Alistair's eyes. You are mistaken. All treaties, all trade, all contact between our lands is hereby terminated. You will find your neighbors are far less forgiving of your debts without my kingdom's grain to fill their bellies. He took a step forward, his shadow engulfing the 3 of them. You gave me your treasure thinking it was trash, he said, his voice laced with an ice-cold contempt that was more terrifying than any shout. Now go back to your empty castle and remember the price of your betrayal. 2 of his royal guard stepped forward, their size and silence an unspoken threat. Her family was turned and escorted out, not as dignitaries, but as refuse being discarded. Anya watched them go, her father's face a mask of ruin, her mother's a portrait of disbelief, her sisters twisted with a jealousy so potent it was almost a physical stench. They were no longer giants in her mind. They were just echoes of a life that was no longer hers. When the great doors boomed shut, leaving the hall in profound silence, Anya turned back to her court, to her pack. She stood before them beside her mate and felt the weight of their loyalty, their respect, their love. She was not a sacrifice. She was not a burden. She was not a curse. Her life had been a cacophony of lies, a painful noise that had tried to drown her. But standing here, in the heart of her new home, she finally understood. She wasn't meant to listen to the echoes. She was meant to be the one true note that cut through them. I am no longer an echo, she declared, her voice ringing with the force of absolute truth. I am the voice.